Good afternoon. I'm Eleanor Alden, and welcome to StepWisdom. I'm going to talk this afternoon about step families, about their joys, about their challenges, about their difficulties, their complexities, and their successes. I am hoping that you'll join me in working through some of the ideas that I'm developing about why some step families seem to do so well, about how numerous they are, and why they've always done well, and why some seem to be such a catastrophic failure. The average length of time for marriages throughout history has been 7 years. That's a little hard to swallow, I think, but if you look back through from 1000 AD on, it's pretty consistent that people stay married about 7 years before something happens to dissolve the marriage. Now, in the past, the most common reason for the dissolution of a marriage might have been the death of a mother in childbirth, which was the most common cause for women dying prior to this century. Just as a stat to throw out, 5% of all women only made it to age 50 in 1900. So we're living a lot longer. And I think actually the stats are beginning to show that we are staying married a little bit longer. But as a species, we don't have a lot of good track records about how to stay married happily for 50 years. The other solution that people found to ending marriages was just to abandon their spouses. Orphanages used to be filled with people who had lost their father. They may have called their mother a widow, but the dad ran off to sea, he ran off to war, he went to the Wild West. He just disappeared. There was no formal divorces. There weren't even marriage certificates in many places. So marriage and divorce was a little more flexible, and now with the internet we can track somebody who abandons his family down all over the world. We couldn't do that back then. We used to have indentured servants. We had slaves. Children were put to work in factories who'd lost one or both parents. I actually think that step families show a higher family value than doing that. We have 20 million step families in this culture. If the average family is 4, that's 80 million people who acknowledge and say, I'm in a step family. That's a lot of people out of 300 million people. There are other people who I call closet step families. They are single parents who have a boyfriend or a girlfriend they're not married to, but there's children in the home. And they are identified in the census as a single parent situation. There are foster families, there are adoptive families, there are lots and lots of people. Maybe half of the population of children in this country is being raised by at least one person who is not biologically related to them. That's a lot of people. And a lot of these people are very, very successful. They're happy, they're relational, they're creative. So why do we have this gloomy, doomy, horrible image of stepfamilies? Some of it is the media. We like to look at bad news. We don't tend to put our headlines out of being, Sally made straight A's today. We look at what's awful. We're designed to do that. We're designed to look out and make sure that everything's okay. We're watching for danger all the time. And we like negative news. Stepfamily myths and fairy tales follow that pattern. So it's not just the news media today, it's news media all the time, is that stepfamily stories tend to be more about what you should not do. It's good advice. It's good wisdom. It is the wisdom that we have been handed to by thousands of years of generations of people who lived in stepfamilies, who knew what it was like to not succeed, who knew what it was like to have all these complex, difficult situations where biological parents were not present and somebody else was in charge. Sometimes that's for the good. King Arthur had Merlin. He clearly was a stepchild several times over. Out of our last four presidents, 3 have been in a stepfamily. 2 have been stepchildren, 1 was a stepfather. These people are not, terrible examples of what stepfamilies do to people, unless you've got some political agenda you want to go into, which I'm not going to engage in right now. There is lots of information from new research that indicates that what is really wrong with the statistics about divorce causes all this problem is toxic relationships cause what's wrong with kids. Kids who grow up in a toxic situation where people who are in charge of taking care of them are caught in a battle, are angry, are disrespectful, are abusive, who are emotionally charged around disliking their other spouse, create children who are abandoned, neglected, abused. Now, whether there's a divorce or not is not the issue. Toxic marriages create very disturbed people. Toxic divorces create very disturbed people. And toxic stepfamilies create disturbed people. It's not the title, it's the people involved. What are you doing in your relationship with the child and with the child's other parents or other parent that creates tension, that creates distraction from the business of raising children and being happy? It is not helpful to stay in a marriage that is toxic. It is destructive. Actually, some of the worst cases I've ever worked with of dissociative, really harmed people, the parents didn't divorce. They just carried on a battle and a royal uproar for years and years and years. These children would have done better if there had been a divorce. However, toxic divorces are not easy to deal with either, and they often make for very difficult adjustments to a stepfamily situation. I work with these people, I actually enjoy it, but I do know there are times when you are stuck with a situation that you have gotten out of a toxic relationship, and the goal of a really solid co-parenting relationship with your former spouse is just very, very difficult, if not impossible. It is not a good prognosis for having a great stepfamily to have that kind of tension always sort of at the door. I do recommend, if you're divorced and you're thinking about starting a stepfamily, is clean up whatever it is with your former partner before you really get into this, if you can. If you can't, get some help, because it's really difficult. What I'm going to go over today is some of the issues that strengthen stepfamilies, some of the warning signs from the past and from the present about what doesn't work, what is harmful to children, and what makes some kids so incredibly flexible, adaptable, aware of diversity, all kinds of qualities they get literally from the stepfamily. What makes some families so gifted in this and some don't make it? Some end up with multiple, divorces and desperately trying to find a place where love is the dominant factor in a home. That is the goal. When we talk about getting married, we talk about honoring, cherishing, loving, respecting, and some other stuff about till death do us part and forsaking all others. Usually by the time those two go out the window, the first four have been long gone. And those four need to be in place. You may not love your ex-spouse, but you can honor and respect their duties and their obligations and their responsibilities and their love and caring for their children. You can also honor that in step-parents. These are people who have a compassion and a heart that is awesome at times to me. They love people they're not biologically related to that sometimes aren't very grateful, that sometimes are kind of angry, that sometimes are difficult, especially if you get a teenager right off the boat, because teenagers are pushing away from their biological family anyway. They are, they've already decided their bio mom and bio dad are kind of not quite cool. And to add a step-parent, you are really going to get it. And yet these people have the wisdom and the courage to keep going and to provide amazing gifts for these children. And at the end of the day, I think what we have is a society that really values family. We don't want kids in orphanages. We don't want kids in foster homes. We don't want kids on the street. We want kids raised in a loving family. Our bar for what is a good marriage has gone up. Our bar for what's a good family, our bar for how we raise children has gone up. I think this is good news. And I think there are ways that we can make this better for everybody. But we need to stop demeaning stepfamilies. We need to stop immediately when we heard the word step go into a crisis mode or into a negative paradigm, because it isn't justified and it's not helpful.